Welcome to Public Comment. I'm John Dunbar, former mayor of Yountville.
And I'm Alfredo Pedroza, former Napa County supervisor.
This is where we talk about politics, people, and whatever else is on our mind.
Well, John, today, I think what's on my mind, and I hope is on your mind too, is DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Acknowledging that this is a loaded topic. It's one that naturally is going to create some emotion on all sides, but it's an important conversation we have.
And I want to acknowledge, as we talk about this, I bring a perspective that is my personal perspective, and it's not meant to really represent other people. You bring the same kind of unique individual perspective. So we aren't really judging others, but we need to have the conversation about how DEI has been needed in our community, the benefits it has, and also some of the challenges it's created.
Look, I'm envisioning the journey, right, of we had a problem that we were trying to solve that we all acknowledged diversity mattered, so we did something around it, right? We created these initiatives, and now we're seeing the outcome, the fact that you and I, two people that look different, two with different walks of life, are having a podcast, and it's possible. But now I think what we're flirting with is it's gone too far, and it's creating division, it's creating emotion around our community, which is not the problem that we were trying to solve. So I think for that, we should go inside and talk about it.
Let's do it. The folks that used to feel comfortable aren't feeling comfortable anymore.
Today, I do think it's different.
Not everyone is starting from the same place.
And I don't want to create another class of people where now they feel left out.
Where do you want to start?
Well, look, I think this topic is one that's sensitive, that we have to be very careful and mindful of, and one that we actually spent some time preparing for. Not that we don't prepare for the other ones, but you do a good job. I tend to just go with what I feel. But I say that because I think we're sensitive to what this topic means, especially in this moment. But it's one conversation that I think we need to have. We've been very bullish on what we've talked about, from immigration to social media to keyboard warriors. And some of the feedback I think we've received is we appreciate the conversations we're having. I think this one's no different than that.
I agree. And I think it's a topic that is an issue locally as well as nationally, even globally.
Yeah.
We really want to focus, I think, today on how our community as a whole is better for, in my opinion, the diversity, inclusion that we have, but also some of the challenges that we've seen grow up.
Well, and look, you're a white guy, I'm a brown guy, but we're both guys, we're both people, we're both human beings. And I think being able to provide those perspectives, so I think we bring credibility to it. We're not experts in this field, but we have life experiences that can help us tell the story, right? And for me, part of what I hope we can accomplish today is make sure people understand the pros and cons, right? The good and the bad, and how it's hard. And I'll just say, look, I think we went too far. And I say that as someone that comes from parents that were immigrants that never spoke English, to the fact that, when when I was doing parent-teacher conferences, I had to go with my parents because they didn't know English, right? So I say that to give you some perspective and color on some of the opinions that I think have, given me the perspective I have on today. And I think around diversity is, I want to say it matters. Diversity makes a difference. It leads to better decisions. It leads to better outcomes, along with equity and inclusion. So I say that saying that as the baseline. But what I want to make sure that we talk about is what have been some of the shortcomings with that. And I can tell you some of my personal experience, when I was running for office, people are all, great, you're a Latino candidate. I'm like, no, I'm a candidate for city council. I'm a candidate for the board of supervisors. I'm Latino and I'm proud of it, but it doesn't define what I'm trying to do. And I think that's the hard part, because when you say that, you're going to piss off some people saying you're not too Latino. And it's not that. I'm proud of that. But then if you're too Latino, the other side gets too pissed off that you're not one of us. And I think that's where this diversity and equity and inclusion topic kind of gets nestled into, is how do we make sure we're understanding what we're trying to accomplish? And when I was running for office, I wanted people to look at me for the qualifications and the experience I had as a human being, as a person. Now, the fact that I was Latino, the fact that I am Latino, the fact that my parents didn't know English, the fact that they were immigrants, I believe gave me competitive advantage among other people, because I could speak about things that other people didn't understand. So it became an advantage, but I never wanted to be judged based off that, because I felt it wasn't taking into account all my strengths and attributes. And I think that's part of what we're trying to wrestle with as a community.
Yeah, I appreciate you starting with your background and kind of where you came from to get to today.
Well, I came from Queen of the Valley. That's where I was born. My parents, to your point.
But similarly, so I grew up in Oakland. And so when I say I grew up in Oakland, people look at me like,
you say that and we don't believe it. I'm sorry.
There are a lot of different parts of Oakland. And I grew up in a middle-class, family, Catholic family. My older brothers, Peter and Michael. I'm John. I mean,
shocking.
Catholic family. We had family values. We had values that we learned from the church, but also from our community. When I went to school, there was a really well-diverse population of students. So that's what I grew up thinking was normal everywhere. And as I got older and became an adult, you realize that that isn't the case all the time. And you also start to realize my starting point was ahead of others because of our either economic or social, cultural status. And I really started to better appreciate not everyone is starting from the same place.
True.
And we see that still today. And there have been programs, a lot of DEI programs and others that are intentional to help people with the equity. And it's equity as opposed to equality, because it's okay not to be equal in the same, but there needs to be equity for opportunity, for growth, development, and all those things. So there's also a profiling and an assumption made just by how people look, whether it's skin color, whether it's age, however you wear your clothes, whatever it is, people are judging you already. They don't necessarily appreciate what you've gone through to get where you are.
Yeah.
And there are times when people don't have the same opportunities as others. And so I think the effort to provide more opportunities for people has been a very good, positive thing for our community. The challenge is, to your point, when it goes to a level where some people, I hate to use the overused term now of weaponizing, but there's some of that where it starts to become a negative, that you're kind of forcing people to be different. And then there's a judgment that's being passed if you are not in what people think the way you should think. They don't accept it, even though they want you to accept the way they feel.
Yeah. Look, I think you said forcing, and I think that's so appropriate, right? Because if I was in a meeting with you, I would want you to look at me based off what I bring to the table. Not that I'm someone that's an immigrant or Latino. All those attributes are going to show up in what I contribute and how I make the outcome better as a person. But I think when we were in a meeting, and if you were to look at me and say, man, this person is not qualified, why are they here? That's a disservice. And I think that's where the forcing comes in sometimes, where we want DEI, but it's not producing the outcome we want. Now, going back, right, because this is the sensitive part, you and I acknowledge the value of diversity. We know that it makes things better. We know that if you're a company and you have a board of directors that's diverse, it's likely going to lead to better decisions. We know that if you have an executive team that mirrors your community of diversity, it's going to lead to better decisions, better decision-making, better processes, of more engagement. I can speak because I've seen that in action, right? I think the challenge that we're having right now is when people say you went too far, because people are feeling left out. And to me, that's the problem, right? And I look at my example. My parents came from a foreign country. They bought a house here. They put us through school. And what I was taught, the values that I was raised with, is the opportunity, right? Yes, there are people that have a different path. There were people that were born on first base and second base and third base. But I'm not going to bitch about that, right? What I was taught is see how fast you can get to first base, and you better sprint to second base and try to get to third base. That to me is an inclusive community where people can get to those bases based off what they bring to the table. And I think when you started shifting to a culture where we want, our law enforcement to have this DEI component to it, And when people started saying, hey, the people that we're hiring don't have the qualifications, don't have the experiences, I don't think that does diversity good. I think that creates more tension in our community.
I think that we have very well-intentioned people that are embracing the concepts that we're talking about today. But there are also examples where people are taking advantage of that kind of generosity of welcoming. And I also think it's challenging when we kind of lump all three together, diversity,
True.
equity, and inclusion, as if there is this checklist that you need to check off of each of those elements. Diversity, 100% makes communities better.
Yeah.
Thought
without a doubt
is smarter. People bring their own life experiences. I think it's hard to find somebody that's really going to complain about that. Yet some people still will, because diversity also means accepting people that don't look or sound or act exactly like you.
Yeah.
And that's not comfortable for some people. Equity, like I said, is really more than equality. It's about providing fair opportunities for everybody. And wherever you're starting from, you have opportunities. Going back in the history of our country, there's some examples of some really bad, stifling laws, like redlining for being able to own a home. Basically, if you were white, you could live in neighborhoods, and if you were any other color, you were excluded. And in some cases, the government was doing the excluding.
Yeah.
And so it has taken generations to get through that and past that, but there is still some of that lingering, because it's not that long ago. This was in the 50s and even 60s where that was prevalent. And so equity is about giving everybody a fair opportunity.
Well,
you do have to work hard to achieve, but everybody should have the opportunity to work hard.
And look, I want to be clear. I don't support going back to the days where that was happening, right? Like that doesn't create good communities, healthy communities, right? But I think where it swung too far is when you started making decisions that it was inhibiting hiring the best and the brightest minds, the best and the brightest people. Because I happen to believe that whether you're brown, white, or black, you can compete with the best, right? The color of my skin doesn't define what I can do. And I think when we made it too much about that, it became a disservice. And that to me is kind of what we're trying to grapple with is how do we go back to acknowledging diversity as a value add? It's who we are, right? It's shaped me. It's, your experiences have shaped you. But we make sure that we're looking at people's experiences, what their contributions can be. And look, if we had to go hire someone because this podcast is blowing up, you and I would probably want the best and the brightest, right? And to me, that's how it should be. Whether you're hiring for a board of directors or your new administrator, right? How do you balance those pressure points? Again, acknowledging that diversity matters. I think where I'm hesitant when you talk about, equity and inclusion, people define things very differently today too. And I think that's where we have to be careful, where our definition is not the universal definition. Other people look at it differently. And I think we have to be sensitive to that as well.
It makes me remember back to when I was president of the League of California Cities, 2019 and 20. And I had serving with me 4 other officers in that organization. They were all women.
Yeah.
And our executive director, who's still there, is a woman. And there was some cultural diversity, ethnic diversity in that mix as well. And they would tease me as being the only guy. I'm like, I don't really feel like it's about gender, because it was about the job we were doing, and we all had to rise up through the organization. I was there for 18 years.
Wow.
And I was about 15 years in when I became president. So I didn't get anything handed to me, nor did any of them. And in some cases, things like gender, age, ethnicity, I do think are pretty invisible, but it doesn't happen everywhere. We have to acknowledge it. There's absolutely a bias, and it's not fair that some people have to overcome hurdles to get to the same place.
Well, look, not to go around in circles, but this happened for a reason, right? So I think we had a clear problem to solve. You talked about the redlining. So I think there was things happening that caused this. But I think what we're trying to flirt with is how far did we go? And to your point, when you were in that leadership position, you didn't make it about gender or race. You made it about having a team that you all could produce good outcomes for the League of Cities. And I feel the same way. I was the first Latino in Napa County to serve, but how many times did you hear me say that? Not many. Not because I didn't want the association of that, because I didn't want to be defined by that. I wanted you to look at my contributions, the outcomes. And now that I'm out, I can say, whether you like it or not, there's a list of things I did, right? Because I was an effective supervisor, not because I was Latino, not because I came from immigrant parents. All that shaped me as a human being, that allowed me to create things, to allowed me to create outcomes. And I think that's what I hope people understand is celebrate diversity, embrace it, but understand the responsibility of what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a community where everyone can participate, where people can be at the table. And I think the days of creating unfair advantages, this shouldn't be there. Because I happen to think I have family members that are executives at corporations, at companies, and they didn't do it because they were a woman or Latina or Latino and a male. They did it because they outcompeted. They outwon the competitive competition to be the person that got hired. That's the beautiful thing. And I think we have to be comfortable with it. And I'm saying that again, as someone that is brown, but I don't say it with that color because we believe in competition.
Yeah. One of the things I think we all need to learn from is people that talk about seeing themselves in others. And I think what we're also kind of managing right now is the transition from when things were different and in a negative way.
Yeah.
And it was only a generation or two ago.
And it was bad. Like, let's acknowledge it. That shit was not okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
It was illegal, should have been illegal, and laws were totally biased, whether it was against race or other things. But we acknowledge that there was enough of a change lately in the last, I'll say, a couple decades, that it's made some people uncomfortable. And that's, I think, where some of this pushback is coming from, that they, to your point about have things gone maybe further than is helpful. Some would say yes. And it might be because the folks that used to feel comfortable aren't feeling comfortable anymore. And that actually is not a bad thing.
But look, going back to what we said is not okay. When you cannot buy a home because of the color of your skin, or you were not getting the ability to compete for the chief job, for the supervisor job because of your background, we fixed that, right? Or these efforts tried to fix that, right? Where it was blatant discrimination and there was some barriers, intentional barriers that were keeping people back from reaching their truest potential. Today, I do think it's different. And I can't expect you to understand that, right? Because you haven't faced that, but I have, right? So if my parents in 1992 were able to buy a house in a predominantly white community, they did it because they could, right? If I was able to run for office in a city that hadn't had a Latino representative, I did it because I could, because this community somehow saw value in my collective experiences. Same with the Board of Supervisors and all the positions we've accomplished. You being president of the League of Cities, it didn't happen because you're a white male. It happened because you were the best person for the job. And I think that's what we got to remember. That is what we hope we create. It brings people together. Now, what I think has been the problem where I see this going too far is when then I look at people like you, right, that might feel left out and might trigger emotion because you think we've gone too far. And I'm not saying you believe that. I'm just saying, generally speaking. And I think that's where I don't want people to feel like they were left out, like it was very intentional back in the day. But I look at where we could go, and I don't want to create another class of people where now they feel left out because we went too far. And I think that's part of the balance that we're trying to strike is we know the problem that we had to solve. We did it, evident by the successes we have today. But if you go too far, what other problem do you create?
I will say it's limited success, and it's not perfect, and we're not to a point of success that is guaranteed either. There are some very subtle circumstances. Like if you're in a conversation with somebody and you talk about certain careers, professional careers, you say, oh, my doctor, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what did he say?
Yeah.
Or this CEO, oh, what did he say? And so there's already a bias that we have kind of built in from decades ago. The biases you have are different than the biases I have. And so it's important that we're consciously aware of that. Not going to disappear easily or immediately. Being aware is better than not. And for a long time, people were clueless about the fact that, oh, doesn't everybody have the same chance? I don't think you should get a better opportunity than me because I've worked really hard. Well, so have you.
But I think we're potentially hitting a point in time right now where there is a group of people in our community that feel like they're not getting a first shake. They're not getting the equal opportunity because DEI went too far. And I don't pretend to understand that, John, because I can't, right? Because people could say I've been the benefactor of a DEI movement. And I guess what I hope people that are tuning in understand that there is a time and a place, right, to have these conversations, but we got to do that more often, right? And it's okay to talk about a sensitive issue like we're talking about right now, because guess what? We're probably going to get called losers like we have already for having some of the conversations, but we're having a conversation because if you don't, then you suppress these feelings that people might be feeling. And I'm okay talking about it. I'm okay saying, as someone that has been a minority and is a minority in our community, I can see how people might think something, and I might tell you the opposite, right? And I just believe that as we move forward as a community, having a place where diversity is important, having a place where we can have a conversation, but understanding we're here, we're at the table. Most people can compete in a merit-based system, tends to allow most people to be competitive. And I think that's what I hope we accomplish.
We've talked mostly about diversity and equity, and inclusion is a little bit different. And that's why I was talking about maybe not lumping them all together as if it's one thing. Inclusion makes some people uncomfortable because it kind of fundamentally means people that aren't the same need to coexist. And again, that's a good, positive thing. It's accepted differently by different people, and different people are in different circumstances, just like we talk about, whether it's with education, whether it's with your economic status, whatever. And it's sometimes hard for people to accept and include people that aren't the same as themselves. And that's where I think some of that real frustration, even anger from people that have been left out or sidelined or maybe thought less of by some people because they have different challenges or different ways at looking at life. I just am one of those people. It's like, let it all happen. And then we can get past this judging which ones are appropriate or not, but then don't judge me either with how I feel about truth.
Well, look, as we wrap up, I'm going to double down on diversity matters. It has matter and it will matter into the future, right? It's the bedrock. It's what makes communities better, makes people better, makes business better. But I think on the inclusion it's happening. It has happened, right? And maybe I'm just different in a sense because it's been part of my life for so long, but I can walk into Whole Foods market and feel just as well as walking into an Azteca market, right? So I don't pick up on the differences. And I hope people are becoming more accepting of that. You could go to either one of those markets and it's a market, right? And if you're going in with this color of the inclusivity, it's there. And I think we have to start setting labels aside, putting value on these definitions and understand it's people, right? And they all want to be part of it. They all want to be included. They're all part of our community. So I think less front loading on the labels and more of it's life. Move on.
And I want to really kind of applaud Napa County because we have seen a serious growth in diversity in these last few decades. Almost equal numbers of Hispanic and white population with other races represented, much lower numbers, but hopefully we're able to see diversity even beyond that. American Canyon is the most diverse city in the entire county by far, with dozens of language is spoken and culture is represented, it doesn't happen immediately, but at least our county community has evolved, and I think we're all better for that.
Cheers to diversity.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Alfredo, I do want to touch on something that we just talked about, and that is your interest to really kind of prioritize a merit-based system when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially, I'll say, in the workplace.
You know, look, I know that may surprise people. And look, it surprised me too, right? Because most folks would believe, someone from my background would believe, you know, we should do DEI on steroids. But I guess, John, for me, it's different. Like, my parents bought a house based off their hard work. You know, I was able to go to college. I ran for city council, the board of supervisors, based off hard work, not because I was Latino. So when I say things like that around a merit-based system, it's because I've seen how a merit-based system has allowed me to achieve success as I define it. I haven't needed, you know, an initiative. Now, I'm the benefactor of a lot of the hard work of other people, right? So I don't want to misrepresent that, and that's why I do believe diversity matters, and that's to me like the bedrock of it. But when you allow people to be the best they can be, a lot of good shit happens. And that's kind of what's rooted in my philosophy, and maybe why I'm inclined to say not enough of the DEI, but at the same time, let's not lose sight of merit, because that's where people can really excel, regardless of your background, regardless of the color of your skin.
And the way I look at that, and I can totally understand what you're saying, it's that it shouldn't be the only reason.
Yeah.
It can be a reason. In some cases, it's absolutely appropriate to include somebody's entire life experience.
Yeah.
But it also requires other elements that prove somebody is the best choice for a certain situation.
You know, I think what you just said there is spot on, right? Because we're living in a moment where we tear things down. And I think this is one where you don't dismantle the good work that DEI did, because it did do some good work. But at the same time, don't misrepresent, don't lose focus, don't not value merit. And I think if you do both, I think that's how you create a good community, right, and a good nation, versus kind of just prioritizing one or the other. So I'm glad you said that, because to me, I think that's the best summary you could have.
And I think that's part of the struggle, which is finding that balance of all the different factors when we're evaluating somebody's worth.
Well, again, if people tune in, I hope they understand it's not choosing one or the other maybe, but it's acknowledging there's a place for both. And I think if we do that, we're a better place because of it.
I could toast to that.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I like that.